big welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you just take a little moment to get comfortable. And I wanted just to formally welcome you all to our voice note session this evening, Strong Enough to Care. I want to begin tonight by acknowledging the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, this harbour and the waters. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people here with us tonight. The name Camaragal actually means something like people of the Stone Country, a clan known even by neighbouring peoples for their strength. Camaragal men conducted initiation ceremonies for the young men of neighbouring clans, a sign not just of power, but of trust, of responsibility, of the belief that raising boys into men was serious, communal, and sacred work. Tonight we are here to ask some of those same enduring questions. What does it mean to become a man? What do we owe to each other? And what does it mean to care? These are not new questions. In many ways, they are ancient ones. Through our immersion on Yolngu country in Arnhem Land, students and staff of Redlands have sat with communities who have held these questions carefully across generations, where masculinity is not about dominance, but obligation, where being strong means being responsible to your kin, your country, and your community, where a man's worth is measured not by what he conquers, but by what he protects and nurtures. So tonight, on Camaragal country, as we gather to talk about boys and men, let us do so with that same spirit of deep listening that this land has always known. We are grateful to be here and grateful to gather together as a community for a conversation that really matters. It's wonderful to see so many members of our community here tonight, board members, Redlands staff, parents and carers, and students, of course, from across our junior and secondary schools. And of course, a very warm welcome to our panellists this evening. Dr. Zac Seidler, Mrs. Tara Rushton, Mr. Sean Corcoran, Mr. James Reid, and Mr. Ethan James. We talked about that. Thank you all for being here and for your willingness to contribute to what is an important and timely conversation. Look, I think we all know Sean well. We know him as our principal, educator, mad lover of the Sydney Swans, and he is also a father of 2 young men. James, give us a wave, James. James graduated from Redlands in 2020 as school captain and joins us this evening as a young man navigating life beyond school, university and into the workforce, and he's proudly represented tonight by his family and his little brother Jack. Just a little shout out to Jack in Year 10. Ethan is one of our current Year 12 student leaders. Many of you know Ethan as particularly sporty, but he's also thoughtful, grounded and generous enough to bring the voices and experiences of young people into this space. And his dad and his younger brother Harvey are here tonight to support him. And Tara joins us not only as one of Australia's most respected sports broadcasters and journalists, but also, take it. It's us, it's all right, safe space, but also as a Redlands parent, raising 2 young boys in this world alongside the rest of us. And last but no means least, we have Dr. Zac, clinical psychologist, researcher, and one of Australia's leading voices in boys and men's mental health. Zac's work continues to challenge and deepen the way many of us think about masculinity, connection, and care. I'm not going to read lengthy biographies this evening. They were available on the ticketing page, and I suspect we're all going to come to know our panellists more as we move through what they share, reflect on, and contribute tonight. We are also very fortunate to be gathered here at the beautiful Hayden Orpheum, so close to our school and the heart of our local community, so do settle in and enjoy the space. Tonight's event is part of Voice Notes, a series we have now been running at Redlands for the past 2 years. Across that time, we've explored a broad range of issues shaping the world that our young people are entering: generative AI, teen mental health, social media, International Women's Day, the future of education, and how we might build more balanced, thoughtful and humane communities. We've heard from experts, educators, students, advocates, researchers, and people with lived experience, those deeply invested in these conversations, and sometimes those positioned who are at the margins of those conversations as well. The purpose of Voice Notes has always been the same: to bring students, staff, and families into thoughtful and sometimes challenging conversations about the world around us. Not surface-level discussion, not simple answers, but opportunities to listen carefully to people who speak with experience, credibility, and clarity about real systems, real pressures, and real lives. And tonight's conversation emerged from exactly that spirit. As a proudly co-educational school, we spend a great deal of time thinking about how we best serve all of our students, boys, girls, and every young person finding their way in between and beyond those categories. Following International Women's Day earlier this year, a student asked me a very simple question: when do we celebrate men? And I thought it was important, because while we know there are still profound inequities in our society, especially around gender, power, and opportunity, we also know there are many boys and young men trying to work out who they are in a world that often feels noisy, polarised, and confusing. A world shaped by algorithms, outrage, and increasingly rigid ideas about identity. At times, I think some boys and men quietly feel left out of the conversation altogether, and yet at the same time, we see extraordinary examples of positive masculinity all around us. In our boys, our young men, our educators, our fathers, colleagues, alumni, and our broader community. We see care, compassion, thoughtfulness, integrity, humour, responsibility, and kindness. So tonight is not about fixing boys. It's about understanding the world they are navigating and thinking carefully about how we guide them well. Because if we do not help young people make sense of masculinity, as Dr. Zac says, something else will. And we know that is already happening. My hope for tonight is not that we leave with all of the answers. My hope is that we leave more curious, more reflective, more willing to listen, and perhaps more willing to keep having those conversations that matter. It's now my great pleasure to hand over to tonight's moderator, Tara Rushton. And Tara, thank you so much for leading us in this conversation. Please make them welcome.
Thanks so much, Gemma, for that incredible introduction. It's so great to be here this evening, and it's so great to see so many of the Redlands community in this room. And you're in this room because you care, and you also feel that this is a really important conversation to be having. To give you a little bit of insight, yes, I've got two boys. They're little. One's in Redlands House and the other's in grade 2. And my best friend, when I was pregnant with my first 8 years ago, said to me, "Oh my gosh, this is the best." And I said, "Okay, it is the best. I'm pregnant. I don't know what to expect." She said, "Because it's up to you. You've got the opportunity to raise the next generation of men. No pressure. You have this opportunity to break the cycle of patriarchy, to break the cycle of misogyny, of sexism. Oh, what a role you have." I thought, I haven't even made it into the birthing suite yet. I'm really stressed out. Okay. We just need to take it one step at a time. Fast forward to 2026. We are in a world where all of us as parents, as adults, as caregivers, have 50 tabs open. We are getting bombarded by headlines, the algorithm feeding us what we just looked at, social media, the rise of influencers. And goodness gracious me, sometimes I feel like I'm stumbling in the dark. And with that being said, my kids still are little, but the other day I asked my son to do something and he said, "There you go, babe." And I thought, "Oh, that was his dad. His dad taught him that." So with that as a side, we are trying our best. We are trying our best. I want everyone tonight to be curious, to lean into the conversations and know that this is completely a safe space. There is no judgment in this space. We're here to learn, hopefully to laugh, hopefully, to take away some nuggets and some insights. And this is why we've got the experts alongside us. I'm only here I'm the traffic warden, okay? So these guys are the experts because they are living and breathing it. So to Zac, to Sean, to James and to Ethan, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for your openness. Zac, you're the expert in this space and a big congratulations. You have just become a dad yourself. Yes, welcoming a baby boy into the world.
I didn't do much, guys. Don't worry.
Go, Dad. You're seeing it, you're feeling it, you're touching it, and you're hearing it. So what are you learning right now in 2026? What are young boys, what are young men telling you about their identity, how they're feeling, and the pressures to be or feel a certain way?
Well, my 5-month-old is telling me to change his nappy consistently, but he is, as you've said, the future. So I'm very aware of today and tomorrow and where we are going. It's incredible to have so many young guys in the room. I often, 100%. I hope you all get a choc top for being here. This is worse than the movies, I tell you what. But I'll try and make it entertaining. But I think it's incredible to have you guys represented here, because what typically happens, I was just in Canberra, trying to advocate for men's health with the PM and others, and what tends to happen is that the people who are at any point in time being spoken about are never in the room. And my crying mantra consistently is always nothing about us without us, and this idea that we continue to tell young men what to be, how to show up, what masculinity is, and we don't seem to ask, and we don't seem to listen. A lot of assuming and not a lot of asking. And so, I would love this to be a massive group therapy session with heaps of the young guys, to be honest, because that's my dream.
We don't have enough time.
We don't have enough time. But really what I see today and what I continue, regardless of schools, I work with boys as, young as 8, pretty much all the way up until guys in men's sheds in their 80s. So, and there is a universal thread amongst all of these guys, and I think, that's why dads and grandparents and sons and grandsons can all have a shared language in many ways, because we are socialised into the pressures of modern day manhood that are very constricting and very overwhelming for many. They're also very freeing and fun, and they push us, and so it's that that dichotomy, that idea that things can contradict one another, and you can both love and hate being a man sometimes. You can both really enjoy your friends and the banter and the competitiveness and the hierarchies, and on any given day you can despise it and just not want to be a part of it. And I think that that's the complexity that young guys are dealing with today, which is that there is so much pressure to show up and to be a certain guy. My main takeaway, hopefully, for many of you tonight is the idea that manhood comes in all shapes and sizes, just as being a woman and girl does. And I think women and girls, wear that a bit better because of ongoing conversations about the fact that you can be whatever you want to be. And while we might say that to young boys, we actually don't create systems and structures that help them actually be different versions of themselves. And so the pressures are real. Young men tell me consistently they don't feel valued or seen, and that's a really sad feeling. There's terminology like toxic masculinity and other stuff that makes them feel like they are the problem, and I guess I'm here tonight to tell you that you are the solution, if nothing else. So let's get talking.
When you say, Zac, that young men and young boys, grown adults that you're seeing from as young as 8 say they're not feeling valued and seen, is that across the board from all age groups? That is a feedback thread and a common feedback thread? Yeah,
I think that we live in a culture now that's not very good at holding complexity, which is that, there've been things like the Me Too movement, the rise of feminism, the idea of female empowerment, and lots of young guys, and this is largely led by algorithms, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in due course, and I spend a lot of time in very deep, dark places, guys, so I can tell you about where on the internet I've been. But my research and my clinical work kind of talk to the fact that young guys, are often told that if someone else is benefiting, that they must be losing out. And I'm sure, and this is why I was so keen to take part in a Redlands event, because co-ed schools, for some reason, are few and far between, but they are the greatest learning ecosystems for the jostling of gender and, you know, the belief system that we must all coexist and that you are not in competition with others. We are here to find ways to actually build each other up, if nothing else. And so this idea, this grievance that so many young men are being sold that, that women have taken something from them, that trans folk, that gay and bisexual people are taking away attention, jobs, funding, whatever it might be, and it's leading to a male suicide crisis, a loneliness epidemic, all of that type of stuff. I want us to be able to hold the fact that young men are struggling, are sad in many instances, are lonely, are isolated, are not feeling valued, and that can exist without blaming someone. And instead trying to realize how we can empower these young people to take control of their lives, to question the systems of power that might be holding them back, to realize that, lots of the education system in some ways benefits girls over boys. And the data is clear in many instances, because the way in which boys' brains develop looks very different. We want to run around very often. School was not fun for me. And I've got a PhD now, kids, so, anything is possible. I really do mean that. I'm sure lots of my ex-primary high school teachers are like, what the hell is going on here? But there is a lot to be said for the fact that you have a lot of power within yourself and within your community to start to push against the structures that are holding us back as men in many ways. Instead of blaming others, it's like women have done such a good job of going, wait a second, we can't get into the workplace, we can't get into tertiary education, we're not allowed to do this. And instead of going, how dare you, they say, we're going to change policy. And so I would love, whether it's looking at the mental health system, which is a lot of stuff that I do, whether it's looking at loneliness and social connection, how are we going to start to get guys to create things? Because you go to a march, you go and see petitions, and they are all female-led consistently. So I don't want young guys telling me that they're angry about something but not being willing to stand up and do something about it.
Great advice. Ethan. What does it feel like to be a guy right now? Simplistically, what does it feel like?
Well, I think at the moment there's obviously a lot of contention around the algorithm and the fact that you have to be someone that you're actually not. And we had a conversation not too long ago now, what was that, last week, and we rounded up a few guys from different year groups just to gain some insight. And I think a common thing was that a lot of these boys are expected to be something that they're not. And I was very curious in the fact, because I've obviously been through that space growing up around inside them, but I was very curious in the fact that how can you actually break free of that and be someone that you want to be in comparison to someone that you're expected to be.
What is this someone that you're not? What is this ideal or idealised guy? I
think the main one was when we think about masculinity when we were younger, it was all about being the strongest, being the most competitive, being the most sexually appealing from women. And I think with that, now that I've grown through that and I've seen it happen for myself, a massive part of that for me with masculinity is about being supportive and being kind and being there for someone.
Does it ever feel that there's a push and a pull within your own experience to be one way more than the other, to be the ideal or the idea of a sports captain, and what society, what other examples show us that needs to look like, or that role model looks like, which can be very rigid?
I think it comes down to whoever you surround yourself with. So I'm very fortunate to be around a great group of people, but especially and even with, because we're in a co-educational school, when we look at single-sex schools and people that we're friends with, I feel like it loses the aspect of them being able to socialise effectively, and there's always that stereotype that they have to be within a certain expectation. And with that, I feel like I'm just very grateful to be able to break past that and actually communicate about how I feel.
Do you chat to your mates about it?
Yes, I do. Obviously, I think it's always something that you can talk about more, and probably something that we don't bring up enough. But yeah, I think I'd say I'm very fortunate to have a great group of people around me that I can actually speak to.
Sean, within the confines or the freedom of the school environment and a co-educational schooling environment of Redlands, what are you seeing with young boys who are growing into young men when it comes to their identity and how they see themselves? And have you noticed shifts or changes in the time you've been here at Redlands over the last few years?
Yeah. And I want to start because I think it does get to the question. Seeing this room makes me so proud to be working at this school, because I think it says a lot about our community and the people who are here listening, sharing, showing up. I might start with I haven't seen, and I feel very privileged to be in the Redlands environment. This is my 10th year now at the school, and I test it within our environment, saying there's a feeling out there, what's wrong with boys? Do you see some of those areas? I was at a talk last year for International Women's Day. Our local members, Kylie Tinkins, Ollie Stegel, hosted an event, and it was great. It was wonderful. And Adolescence was the show that everyone was talking about at the time. And the question was, do you see that in the playground at Redlands? And I said, no, I don't see that in the playground at Redlands. And I think there are a lot of elements, whether it's the coeducational space, and I know Ethan and I have talked about that a little bit in the lead up to this, but whether it's the culture of acceptance, and I think Ethan talked about it, I know Zac, you've talked about it and written about it, that just that place where boys feel it's a safe space to be themselves, to not have to fit a certain stereotype. When I say, I said at the open morning just the other day, we say we don't have a typical Redlands student. I hope that cuts through to some of the current students so they feel I can be not a projection of a boy or a girl or masculinity or femininity or sports or arts or academic, but I can actually find that space. So I see that every day. I continually test it with the students. Am I missing something? And students like Ethan and many others in this room say, oh no, Mr. Corcoran, it's not like that. We actually do have that safe space here.
Now, James, you've graduated from Redlands 6 years ago now, I believe. Yeah, 6 years ago. Did you ever feel, when you're in the Redlands environment, that there was unwritten rules or a code of what it was to be a young man?
That's a tough question. Yes, there definitely were. I think it could be pretty hard to break away from that entirely. No matter how good the environment is around you, there are always going to be outliers even that expect you to act a certain way, expect you to behave a certain way, expect you to perform a certain way on the sports field, to get around your mates in a certain way, to act out in a classroom, to chat up a girl. There are all these different things, all these different expectations that I think at school in particular can really add up and can make it difficult to act as a respectful and responsible man in those environments. You do feel this pressure from your mates to be the class clown, to make people laugh, to act tough, especially when you're not feeling right. And that can be very difficult. But I do think having conversations like this, having a night like this, shows incredible progress. It wasn't really a conversation I remember having seriously until I left school. Anything even in this realm. College was the first time I really started to have those conversations, and I think the fact that a night like this can be held and people can have these conversations early puts the men in this room in such a good position moving forward.
What changed in college? What barriers started to dissipate? What happened when you moved out of a school environment with your mates and your peers and the structures and the unwritten hierarchy that exists in a school, the rules? What changed since moving out of that environment for you?
Yeah, at first it's quite difficult to be completely honest, because you move into this environment where, especially for me, I moved away. I moved to Canberra. I started at a new college. I think there was maybe 2 people at the college who I knew before. So you really have this opportunity to redefine yourself, and for some people that's really exciting and fun. But for me, that was quite scary. I knew who I got along with. I had good friends back home, and it was quite intimidating coming into a new environment where you get lots of people from different cultural backgrounds. And I don't just mean, from overseas or anything, but even just from different school cultures, there's a big difference. My college was mostly single-sex schools, and the way they behaved, or they thought that people should behave, was very different to what I was comfortable with, and that was quite isolating. But I was very fortunate that the college I was at was very proactive in tackling those issues early in first-year students. They had this wonderful idea. It was called Nights In. So your floor at college, each floor had about 40 people on it. And once every semester, your group of, every male or female identifying person on each floor would go into separate groups, and for 3 hours you would just talk about any issues surrounding your, identity group that you felt were pervasive at college. So for a lot of the guys, for the first years, a lot of that was talking about things that they were really struggling with fitting in the Canberra culture, making new friends, and that was probably the first time I can really remember ever being asked about that, other than from my parents. That's a very different thing though. A lot of young boys don't want to open up to their families. It can be very intimidating. But that was a really nice time to share with my peers how I felt about things at college, and that was something that really turned around my time down there and helped me to really fit in.
Did you make some long-lasting connections through going through that process and sitting in a really uncomfortable space and having a really courageous conversation?
Definitely. I would say everyone down there became so much closer through these conversations. You learn a lot about the people sitting across the room from you. And especially with some of those boys from single-sex schools who I'm now very good friends with, when I first moved to college, I thought they were, jerks, a bit stuck up, a bit full of it. And it was a good time, I think, especially for them. This was a good time for them to kind of drop that performance. And as a result, I really got close to some of them as I started to learn about, what they really felt, who they really were when they weren't trying to put on this show for everyone else in the room. And through that, I've got some really long-lasting connections from that, and it was a great experience.
Zac, I feel as though what was happening at college for James and bringing this mix of kids together to talk, to connect, was key. It almost feels as though that uni was ahead of its time. I don't hear about schools, I don't hear about unis, I don't hear about my cohort telling me that this was something that they did. They sat in front of a stranger and spoke to them.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting because ANU went through, a very public situation around sexual violence, which led to them shifting all of their policies, and thankfully James was a beneficiary of that, I think. Sadly, it often does take crisis for things to change, and I think that that's actually the overarching narrative about men's health and mental health more broadly, which is that those conversations do happen, but they typically happen in my therapy room, they happen at the GP, they happen in the emergency department, they don't happen super preemptively when they should be. There's also an age situation, which is that, as James was saying, firstly, to all of the parents in the room, there's a time and a place, and it's typically never the time or place to have those conversations. They just don't want to. But there are ways and ways of doing that, I think. And the key is really, it doesn't matter if you're talking to your peers or otherwise, it's about getting onto the same level. It's not like, oh, I'm your father, I'm curious, I have all of the knowledge in the world, let me impart this upon you as you tell me about who you want to be. It's like, I'm still working it out. Let's muddle through this together. And so I think that that's kind of what those conversations are, and there are age-specific ways of doing that. But young guys aren't given those spaces. That's just not, it's not a condoned behaviour. That idea that the Redlands, community, you're not witnessing some of this stuff. I think that there's a lot to be said for where these undercurrents lie, and that it often does take, some horrible crisis of some kind for us to go, oh, we didn't know there was this insidious thing going on in our community. It doesn't need to be, always in our face. And I think that there are so many young people that are struggling without us actually knowing. And we did a campaign last year with LSKD, at Movember, which was a really interesting model of like trying to show two guys. They're walking down the street, they're going for a run together. One of them is really, extremely confident and chatting and talking about what's going on. The other one's really quiet. And as you go through the campaign, you start to see, as it gets to the end, that one of them sadly has taken their own life. And we flip the script because it's the guy who was so outgoing. It's the guy who we never actually realised that banter was just merely a mask. And I think that there are so many of us out there. I did it throughout high school. It was just endless masks, just changing, trying to chameleon my way through and understand what I needed to be to survive in many ways. And Ethan's talking about that idea of like the pressure of who I need to be. And there are these perceptions of what being a man is, and we just act. We act it out often, and it's often directly at odds with who we want to be. And that's the hardest part, which is that you like squish down your own values of being kind and good. And those guys who go to all boys schools, they've just had so much of that reinforcement of that type of behaviour that they can't even find themselves underneath it. And so finding those opportunities to break that mask. The mask is very safe sometimes and is useful, and I would never suggest to anybody to get rid of it entirely, because the world sucks sometimes, and sometimes you just need to smile and grit through it. That's just the reality of this. But there have to be people around you that you can actually sit across from in the hall and have a real honest conversation. And I hope that young guys in the audience can find that person, that mate for life, in a way that they can sit across from and go, who are we? Who do we want to be? What's going on here? And it's not about, buying the Ferraris and having the girls and, we're going to be entrepreneurs, and like all of that stuff is crap. Like it doesn't, firstly, it probably won't eventuate, sorry. Whoops. And secondly, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And what they're selling online is just so at odds with what it means to be human. So I think we need to get back to that core of like, where are we going? And that doesn't just mean getting ripped and rich. Yeah.
Getting ripped and rich.
Controversial.
Yeah.
You can be ripped and rich, but be a nice guy. Come on.
Be all of the things. Be hard and soft and vulnerable and strong. Everything. Sean, you were talking about International Women's Day, and adolescence was the hot series at the time. And for those who haven't watched Louis Theroux's Inside the Manosphere, that's a Netflix documentary that dropped a couple of weeks ago. I didn't really understand what the manosphere was. It felt like I hadn't really dipped my toe in, to be honest, with everyone in the room. The boys are younger. I hadn't really been on social media with my kids. We're watching Taronga Zoo on Instagram. That's exciting for us, and spotting the red pandas. It's a completely different phase of my life. Inside the Manosphere. So when I watched that, I felt as though it was a very extreme representation of online influences and masculinity influences. It felt extreme, toxic, and at times incredibly violent. My question is, Zac, can you tell me, and those in the room that don't understand what the Manosphere is, I thought for a long time I've just been living in the Manosphere. But what is the Manosphere?
Don't talk about Melbourne Storm like that.
And is it where the bottom feeders do live? Because I watched that documentary and I was quite frankly put off.
Yeah. I'm going to be quick about this and overly
Do it.
lay. I'm not going to do it in an academic fashion as I tend to. So the Manosphere started as this online fringe group of subcultures, largely on Reddit and 4chan and Grumble and various other places that I'm sure your young people know about. And it was like pickup artistry, which I'm sure you know, The Game, which was a book that was around when I was a kid. That's where it kind of started. There's Men Going Their Own Way, which is this idea, this subgroup of guys. It's like lone wolves. I don't need anyone else. I'm just going to be on my own. Men's rights activism, which is this idea of grievance that someone else, another group, has taken something away from me. And then you've got like the gym bros and the steroid users and that type of thing. So you've got all of these subgroups, and they used to be really fringe. No one really cared or paid attention. And incels, sorry. Cannot forget the incels. God. They would not be happy if I forgot them. And incels are involuntary celibates, which is a fancy way of saying guys who have decided that they are not going to play the game, that they're not going to seek out a female partner because the whole thing is rigged. The Matrix is pretty much the underpinning of everything. Red pills, which is kind of the overarching narrative of the entirety of the Manosphere, is this idea that if you're a young guy and you take the red pill, you realise that the whole world is rigged against you, and you're not going to succeed unless you play the game. So the Manosphere is pretty much about playing the game. The problem is with the Manosphere is that all of the influencers who are telling you to play the game are actually rigging the game and taking all of your money. Turns out. So Andrew Tate is an asshole, and sorry to be frank. Who would have thought that was going to get? But he, and this is the best way to connect with young guys. They believe that they are being given the keys to success, when in fact they are being actually stripped of their autonomy. They're being taken for a ride. They're being lied to fundamentally. And so the Manosphere now has moved from those fringe groups onto platforms like TikTok and Instagram and others, and they are now being viewed by billions of people, and so it is now very mainstream. This is not a fringe thing, it's very mainstream, and largely it starts out with very innocuous stuff. I want to talk to a girl. I want to go to gym and work out. I want, to do better at business, whatever it might be. Totally fair. I want to work out who I am. It just so happens that the algorithms very quickly take you from that to Tate, to worse, to Sneeko, to it keeps going and going. And that's the concern, which is that the young guys come in seeking something very real about being human, and these business models then decide on our behalf what we should care about, and then suddenly your whole ideology changes. And so I actually don't think that parents should be afraid of this. I really hope that they're not. I want them to be curious. Do not take Louis Theroux's documentary as fact. That is the worst of the worst, and he was trying to show something there, and it's important. But our research shows us like 3 to 4% of what these young guys are viewing, and most of them know that it's crap, but they're bathed in it. And so there's only so much defence that they can have against it. That was supposed to be short. Jeez, sorry.
So, with a grain of salt, but it's not all negative. Can it be positive? Can there be a positive influence from engaging in the Manosphere?
Sure, depending on the definition. It's expanding now, and there's a lot of positive influences out there who are telling you that there are different ways of being a man, and there's lots of them in Australia. Luke Bateman is an incredible example of that. He was an ex-football player, he played for the Raiders, and then he had a gambling addiction. He talks about that really openly, and now he is just obsessed with fantasy books and talks about books all the time. And he's the most jacked dude, and he sits in like flannel, and all the girls are like losing it with him. But I think the guys can see that there are different versions of guys who are. He's actually really successful, and wait a second, he's got his heart on his sleeve. So the Manosphere, I think it's very loose. It's going to break down. I don't think we should get overly attached to this word like we did toxic masculinity. This terminology just erodes us, when instead it's like, what are young men watching and why is the most important question. What are they seeking? And it's typically entertainment. They just want to laugh. It's fair. Motivation. Fair. And this idea of like they want to be inspired and have an understanding of how the world works.
Okay, so not watching funny cat videos or anything like that. It's a bit different. Ethan and James, to you, what are you watching? What are you engaging with online?
Yeah. Give us your phone,
and show
boys.
me your phone, because we're going to just hook it up here. Gemma's going to come up and we're going to go through your history. We're not. Getting so
I'll let
much
Ethan go
trouble.
first.
Ethan.
I think it definitely depends. I think I definitely agree with Dr. Zac in talking about how when you want something, the algorithm definitely exploits that. And I think it's very interesting with that when you're in such a vulnerable stage, growing up, probably from 14 to 16. I think that's definitely more appealing to get into something like that. And I obviously with that, it sort of depends, and people break down what they actually think is true. And I think a massive part of masculinity is lost with that.
Do you follow any type of influencers for, I don't know, gym tips or working?
Give us something, Ethan. Come on.
Well, not necessarily. I don't think in the sense...
Born 6 foot.
Well, I do have to say for Ethan, when we had this conversation, and he said, "Oh, yeah, what is all this manosphere stuff anyway?" So we can check his phone; it's safe because he actually shared with us.
Yeah, well, when I got asked to come on here for the first time, Miss Vanderpeer brought it up, and she was like, "Do you know about the manosphere?" I had no idea. Never heard it in my life. And I think when we broke down the term, I think it's obviously very prevalent, but a lot of young men don't actually see it.
What about for you, James, and your experience of social media or influencers and anyone that you listen to or read or connect with, positive or negative, actually?
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely a bit of the manosphere out there, and I have seen it come across my feeds. I'm very big into my sport, especially recently my trail running and endurance sports, and for some reason a lot of those manosphere influencers love their endurance sports. That seems to be the ultimate test of a man. How far can you run, David Goggins style? It's crazy. And I think a trick for me has been really trying to critically think about what I'm seeing. Almost like I'm back in school in English or history, analysing a source. You do kind of have to take a second and go, what is this actually trying to tell me? What are they trying to get out of this? What should I take from it, and what shouldn't I take from it? Because some of these guys do have some inspiring messages of endurance and perseverance and determination, but then some of them just get lost in these horrible undertones where they say some really demeaning and horrible things about other people in society, whether that's women or another culture or the LGBTQ community. There are some people with horrible, horrible messages out there. And sometimes they can switch really quickly between a quite nice message about endurance and perseverance, and really quickly it ends up in some horrible rant about something that you don't really want to believe in and associate with, but all of a sudden it's all over your feed, and then all of a sudden you think it's all people are talking about because the last 10 posts you saw all said something about it, and it feels like that's what everyone cares about. And it can be pretty hard to escape that sometimes because the algorithm's set up that way, and as soon as you re-engage with a post that they might also be associated with, it's back there. And that's where I've actually found on Instagram in particular, and TikTok also has it, the I'm not interested button is quite good. When I do these kind of second thoughts and go, is this something I actually want to see? Is this something that I like? If I go, no, I don't, you can actually hit disinterested. And it is quite a good way to break the cycle, because sometimes you don't even mean to end up in it, and all of a sudden you're there. I do find that especially with the sports content. I think these bots and these influencers know that the type of person that they want to appeal to is often following these accounts, often engaging in the comments and liking these posts for big sports teams, whether that's the NRL or a runner like I do. And that can very easily get you trapped in the cycle. So I think knowing how to get out of it is quite important. And yeah, I think that ability to critically think about what you're seeing and why you're seeing it, and thinking about what tools you can use to get out of it is really important.
Well, yeah, just with that, I think when you talk about critically evaluating stuff, I think when you're just absolutely bathed in it and all you're doing is just scrolling through your feed, I think it's quite hard to actually look at it and go, oh, this might not actually be right, especially when you're just constantly seeing it.
God, I have so many quick thoughts, but I really love that addition, Ethan, because what we see is so often you get like 16, 17, 18-year-old guys, and firstly they go, oh, younger guys, I feel for them. Like we do this distancing. We're like the vulnerable group. I'm fine, but what about them? And it's like actually when we reflect, it's like, wait a second, I might not be watching this manosphere stuff, but I am bathing in this stuff. Our data shows that young guys are watching like 4 to 6 hours a day of this content. And that's literally across the country. It doesn't matter where you're from. So that is just the status quo. And I think it's very hard for us when we're doing that to have that critical thinking. Like this school is a very unique environment. We're very privileged to live where we do. And so realizing that the vast majority of people, and especially the younger cohorts as well, don't necessarily have those skills, aren't taught those skills. And trying to beat the algorithms is a very hard, and it's literally an impossible thing to do. And you know, my friend Chanel Contos is pushing this incredible movement, Fix Our Feeds, which is pretty much the not interested button, supercharged, which is kind of what we need, because it shouldn't really continuously be in young people's, responsibility to like deal with this on their own. And as much as the social media ban is, putting a delay on things, it's not going to change this when they come back. So we're going to have to do something about that.
And I just think to pick up that point and that sense of the responsibility, I know a lot of teachers are in the room here, and it's that challenge and responsibility to teach that critical thinking. And I know a lot of parents of younger boys who are here, when they're developing those skills and they're bathed in it and they haven't formed that, and then what is the impact there? So it's not just all those younger kids there faced with it. It's how are we all responsible for developing those skills in younger people, so when they are faced with it, they can navigate it a bit more successfully.
Sorry, but what are the parents' critical insight skills when it comes to this content? Like, let's be frank. Like, we didn't grow up with this stuff. You're watching just as much of this crap as your kids are. Sorry. It's the truth. I've seen plenty of dads in Instagram reels, and there's heaps of stuff on there. We are bathed in it as well. And we're kind of guilty and aren't actually doing the time to work out what we're watching and what it's doing to us. So how are we expecting our kids to do that? So I think it's important to go, what's happening on our algorithms? And let's actually make that critical discussion fun. Let's go, wait a second, I love football. I'm watching all of this stuff, and suddenly I'm getting constant gambling ads, and now I'm going to buy some cryptocurrency. Sit down with your son and be like, is this happening to you as well? like make it an activity, because it's wild.
Let's invest together.
So good.
With that being said, if we're all bathing in it and the algorithm is taking us deeper and deeper, we don't even realise it, what are some interventions? What can we do as parents? Because yes, we might be doom scrolling on our phones. I have to say, my husband doesn't have Instagram. So he'll call me out if I'm on social media, and sometimes I'm telling him breaking news about a team that he should know because he hasn't seen it. But he said, I don't want to see it on Instagram. That's not where I'm getting my news. So he's not on it at all. But for me, he's a complete anomaly. So are there these interventions? Because we're doing it, we're all in it, but we're all wearing it, we're all underwater at the moment. What can we do? Are we saying, phone in the bowl, we're having dinner together? What are we doing?
Yeah, well, I think it's leading from the front as parents, and I think it's also trying to realise what your aim is here. If we're talking about manhood and identity and belonging, those things aren't going to be created in isolation on their own in a room. It's going to happen in places like this where we can have conversations and flex ideas and be challenged. But when it comes to devices more broadly, there's plenty of hot takes out there about what to do. I just think that we all need to be a bit more human with our kids and vice versa, which is like the more we realise, as I said, that we are all being played in this game, and realising that the only control that we have is to share that vulnerability of this is pretty difficult, and really the more stressful days, the more you're on your phone and the worse you're going to be at parenting, or the worse kid you're going to be to your parents. It's how this emotion regulation pipeline kind of works. And so actually going and doing it as a family maybe, and sitting down and being like, all right, I got pulled into a vortex today for an hour and a half while I was supposed to be doing something else, and I viewed all of this stuff, and like, rather than this silence that is everywhere, actually a bit of honesty and transparency amongst all of us. And yes, put the phones down when you're having dinner and find ways to actually regain a sense of control, which is funny because that's such a male virtue. Seemingly, it's the thing that's sold all the time is like control and autonomy, and yet these very devices are stripping us of that.
Sean, within school, how do we then, I don't want to say protect, how do we limit, curate, or offer alternatives to what our young boys are seeing?
Yeah, it's not easy because of the pervasive nature. I do think there's two things. One, I think the skill development, I have heard more students as they get to, and some year 12s in the room, who make conscious decisions to get off of certain platforms. My son and around James's age and their friends talk about, I'm going to actually get away from that. So what got them to that stage? Not sure. It's a good question. It's a good thing to unpack. I think in schools, it's the deliberate nature of what we do. It's the conversation. It's being direct about it. We have a program which we've run for the last couple of years where all of our year 9s, half in term 1 and half in term 2, go down to our high country campus down outside of Jindabyne. 9 weeks with no phones. And it is really, I love going down there and speaking, and some of the year 10s who are in the room, might be some year 9s who went in term 1, had that experience. But when I go down there, they say, oh, Mr. Corcoran, it is such a relief. The first couple days are really hard. It is like that detox. And then they start loving it, and they start having those conversations. They start having opportunities to have face-to-face conversations, and it's not through a screen. And last year when I was going down there, I said, I'm really worried about getting back up to Sydney and getting the phone back on me. And I know it'll be there. So the learning that we're trying to, and we're early stages of this, is how do we give them some of that control, some of that autonomy to be able to have a little bit more control over it when they come back. And we encourage the families and the students to have those conversations around the dinner table. Let's actually come up with some rules around at home. So, and some parents have said, yeah, we had to change our practice. Our phones are away at the dinner table now as well, or we're going to be more cognizant of it and working with their children as they go through that together.
It's like there's a prison, and we have the key to get out of our own cell, and then you get out of your own cell, and then there's another huge cell of like society. And this is where Jonathan Haidt talks about the social norms piece, which is that being the Luddite, the idea that you're going to have a Nokia, which I went through so many versions of this, being like, I'm just going to have a Nokia, everything's going to be fine, and then slowly but surely you're like, but what about this, and what about this, and then I'll miss out on this. And so society around you continues to pull you back in with the, FOMO ideology that something is going to be lost. And that's really, a microcosm of what modern day manhood is, which is this idea that I have to do this thing, otherwise I will be an outsider. And ostracism is the greatest fear for young men, fundamentally. Not being a part of something, not feeling like you belong to the in-group, because being on the out-group is seemingly very dangerous. For many it means violence and bullying. It can mean all different types of things. And really a phone is a tether to that safety. And so you need to create groups of people. You can get 4, 5, 6 boys who all decide they don't want to do it and they're all friends with each other. That's a safety mechanism in some ways. That's the only way that you can kind of start to do that. And you can do it within your families. There are ways, but they would rather talk to their friends than you. That's just the truth of it. And so you're up against it. Like that's the way it is. And realizing how strong those pulls and fears are, really, that's the hardest thing.
Ethan, do you feel like you have that relationship with your phone or social media at all?
Well, I didn't actually go on Moonbar, so I haven't had that detox. But I think at times, I'm obviously not going to sugarcoat it, I'm definitely still on social media. But I'm developing the fact that I can, when I see something that I don't need to be seeing, just put my phone down and ignore it. And especially when you've got things distracting yourself. For for example, at the moment there's a lot of study going on. So when you're surrounded in that, and obviously things just like sport, things that make you happy, it breaks you free from that.
What about for you, James? What's your relationship like with?
Yeah, I think it's definitely hard to put it down.
Yeah.
Because you need your phone for everything these days. You can hardly pay for anything now without a phone or something. It's just crazy. So I find it really hard to leave it behind, and you accidentally leave it behind and you panic. You can't feel the weight in your pocket, and that's kind of scary that I'm so familiar with that feeling now of always having it on me. And I do find it's very easy to end up on it when I'm bored. Like you're sitting somewhere waiting for something, or even just waiting for the bus or on public transport, and you're just straight on your phone. So something I've been trying really hard to do is to not do that. So I catch the ferry to work every day, and I've been really trying to keep my phone in my pocket. I might still have my music, but I try to just sit there and enjoy looking out the window or standing outside, trying to take that moment to detox. But it's definitely something I'm struggling with more than I would like to admit. It's pretty hard to break free. And yeah, it's definitely a skill I'm still developing.
Gosh, we're so tethered to our phones. It feels like this life source that we have. In all of the studies that you've done and the research, I read that Movember found that half of Aussie boys feel pressure to act strong and confident all the time. Half. Is there an age when that kicks in, when that feeling, I've got to, okay, the mask's on, this is who I've got to be. Is there an age when that kicks in?
You're not going to like this answer. It depends, about how prominent that pressure is, but it starts at like 5. Yeah, the data shows that pretty clearly. We've done some awesome research. I've got some colleagues that looked at 4, 5, 6-year-olds, and she was with them in preschool, and you start to see them disengage and start to lose that emotional spectrum, that pure joy, that willingness to wear their heart on their sleeve, and it becomes disengaged, detached, disillusioned, that feeling that to be a guy, and I've said this before, and I truly believe it, that modern day manhood and growing up and becoming a man is actually a process of grief and loss. It's a process of carving things away. We have all of these skills. There's no biological difference when it comes to our ability to express ourselves. It's just not there. And what is there are social rules that are passed down to us by God knows who. We don't actually want them half the time, but we imbibe them. They become this truth, this fact. And then later on, I see all of these guys in their mid-40s who are having breakdowns and telling me that how did I get here? Because they didn't actually grow the muscle to reflect on who they are. And there are lots of guys as well, like James and Ethan, who are incredibly in tune. Like this is so good to be able to actually challenge this belief that men just don't have an internal dialogue, But there are lots of guys who are told over and over, and they watch it when they're 5, their dad comes in, the data is clear. Young boys are going to be told to stop crying much faster than young girls. Even if you're the most progressive parent in the world, you're doing it because you were brought up in that world and you have this belief system. We're all complicit in this stuff. And so we need to question that. It doesn't mean that you need to feel bad about having those ideas or attitudes. It's about going, when am I actually projecting them and what might that be doing? And having a conversation with your son about that as well. But it's kind of everywhere, and we need to realise that in fact you have power to go, where are those things that maybe I was told I wasn't allowed to show, and in fact now I'm going to practice them.
How do we keep that door open? If this is happening and presenting as young as 5, how do we keep the door open for our young boys before they're even young guys and young men, and then also create an environment where they don't feel like we're coming in hot? Like, mum's coming in and she's going to ask me to do... They can see it from a kilometre away. I got you. Yeah. So how do we, what are some tips on... Consistency
is everything, Tara.
Yeah.
Like, you don't wait for something crazy to happen, or like he's been bullied or he's bullying or whatever is going on. And I'd love, I'm sure there's plenty of young guys in the audience who felt there's moments where they challenge, and I think that at the core of it is flexibility. What I stress consistently, and what Movember does, moustaches grow in all shapes and sizes, as do men and boys. And so the idea of diversity, of flexibility, if you are the same man in every room, if you go into every classroom, if you go home, if you go into the football pitch and you're the same person, that is not what humanity is supposed to be. You're supposed to be context specific. You're supposed to adapt to where you are, and that requires flexibility. Being a firefighter, I need you to run in, I need you to be stoic as hell. I don't want you crying when you're trying to save me. Yeah, I don't want that. I'm not going to tell you to do that. I have no desire. What I do want is when you come out and you've seen some horrible stuff, go back and have a discussion with someone about it and hold both of those things as truths that they can coexist. That's kind of the key here, which is that multiple parts of yourself can coexist, and that's fine. And lots of people have different versions of themselves that they splinter off, and that's okay.
Sean, in the school environment, how can we amplify this to happen, amplify the good, and amplifying turning up and being yourself is just enough?
Yeah, I was thinking as Zac was speaking, it's such, I was reflecting back when Ethan and I we had a just great privilege, I know some of the boys are in the room, to hear from boys in year 10, 11, and 12 in preparing for this, and just asking them some questions about what it's like and hearing that space. And when I heard from them talking about those areas of, it's not black and white. And when we were asking about ideals of manhood, and they're talking about, guys who are vulnerable, looking at, fathers who were those figures for them, people who listen and learn from mistakes. And we're hearing this from, a bunch of boys in this room. And so my answer to that is, it's actually when the peers, because they don't listen to the parents as much, and the teachers in the room, we know they don't listen to us as much. But I know when the peers have those conversations, I believe they're more powerful. And I think that's the space. And it happens formally, but it also happens a lot informally in those spaces, I think.
Do you feel like that, James? When's the best time? When's the best space to lean in and have those conversations, be it with your parents, be it with your mates, be it with people that you love? Yeah,
I definitely think the informal space is a great way to start. It's kind of about normalizing the conversation, not making it a big deal. Like, there's nothing worse than sitting down across the table from your parents or anyone. It could be your mate. If you sit across the table from your mate and you try to have that conversation right then and there, it's a pretty hard one to have.
I'm worried, James.
Yeah. I always found like sport was a big thing for me with my friends, where we first really started to share how we were feeling, whether that was, throwing a footy or going on a run. Actually, running was a big one for me. But it was just a great time for us to, kind of focus our bodies on something else, but then still have the chance to, start these conversations. And that also then meant that we could follow it up later in a more formal setting if we needed to. And, now every time I see them, whether it's a run or not, we're checking in on these things that we've been talking about for so long now. And I think that's been a really good thing, having that safe space where you can speak about it. And it doesn't feel like a big deal because it's, just something you do every time you see them. Yeah. You ask them how they're going, you let them know how you're going, you talk about your relationships and how work's going and all of the above, really. And yeah, I think that's the key to it, is just normalizing it, making it feel like not a big thing to talk about.
I think also with the formal aspect of it, like obviously it's a bit more intimidating, but when you talk about informal and just having a casual conversation, I think quite often it's skipped, and you kind of miss that sense of actually talking about your feelings and what you're experiencing in that moment.
And Ethan, is there something that you want us to know? Is there something that we are not asking you, the guys in our life, the young men?
I don't necessarily think it's like one big question, but definitely consistency. I think checking up regularly is the main purpose of each conversation, and making sure that you see past just the visuals So obviously you can see someone and think they're looking down, but obviously as Dr. Zac was saying, like those confident people might not necessarily be the ones experiencing the worst.
And Zac, as we wrap up and we lean in and we become curious and try and open these doors and keep them open with our kids, is there something, a last nugget that you think would be really beneficial to leave this room with that will keep those channels of conversation open and, you know, the barriers down?
Get to know them and let them get to know you. I think importantly, you know, we have so much of this discipline punitive relationship that goes on, and I think that you know, parents really realizing that we are all muddling through and trying to work out who we are. This journey never ends. You know, I would question whether the vast majority of men in this room, fathers, have sat down with their mates at the pub and had a conversation about what masculinity today means to you. You know, the women have done it. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about it. On your behalf. Defined it for you.
It was on the agenda. Yeah. That's what we do when we catch up.
But like, how good to be able to actually, you know, there's an inflection point where guys, as I said at the start, really take control of this stuff and start to, you know, have these conversations off their own bat and start to create these movements. And that requires in many ways for the dads to lead from the front. That means making sure that your social connections are not once a year, that your sons actually see that you're going out and bring them along. Like, show them what it means to have true, vulnerable, deep conversations that aren't full on in the dark mental health, you know, in the back corner because crisis hits. It's doing this stuff consistently, as Ethan said, but it's also about trying to do it in a pretty normal way. Like in therapy, guys with me are going to move between talking about having suicidal thoughts and talking about the football this weekend. Like, that is how it works, and we don't need to pin them down to this heavy conversation all the time. It will move, and you just sit back and allow them to lead, because they have a lot to say and a lot to teach us, and I don't think we're listening enough.
Well, Zac, Sean, James and Ethan, thank you so much for your vulnerability and your honesty tonight, and I hope that we've left with some nuggets. We don't necessarily have to leave with all the answers or any at all, because, as Zac said, we are still just trying to work it out ourselves. We're imperfectly perfect in every way, shape and form. But thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you so much for joining us at this event. Thank you.